Hello and welcome to MOCA GA. I'm Lexis Swats, the Administrative and Educational Programming Coordinator. Welcome to tonight's Artist Talk featuring MOCA GA's 2024-2025 Working Artist Project Fellow, Ayana Ross. Ayana Ross is a Georgia native, currently living and working out of the metro Atlanta area. Ross is a figurative oil painter whose work explores the intergenerational impact of social themes, including topics of identity, race, equity, and broader evaluation of our value systems. She combines traditional oil painting techniques using figurative realism with decorative elements and design. Since the first day of her installation, Ayana has opened the space up in the warmest way. There was laughter, music, and just a good cultivation of energy since she stepped into the space. I've actually been comparing this show to a warm hug. It's been very special not only to me, but to everyone who has been able to experience it. And so it's an honor to be presenting Miss Ayana Ross tonight. Thank you for reminding us to imagine better. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you. Thank you. And to start out, thank you all for being here. You could have been anywhere in the world, anywhere in the city even, and I just appreciate your time. So growing up, most, if not all the women in my life had a china or curio cabinet of some sort. My mother, my aunts, my grandmothers, great aunts, they all had a collection of china, crystal, ceramic figurines, wood carving, heirlooms, and memories that were safely tucked away in these cabinets to be seen but not handled except for on occasion. These vessels of memory and the keepsakes and relics they contain represented an intentional curation and display of cultural, social, and historical artifacts for both present presentation and for future generations. Shielding and showcasing. These women, and likely women in your lives as well, were engaging in a daily act of self and collective preservation, protecting the fragile and important from threats that were seen and unseen, but keeping them visible as symbols of continuity. And I recently told my husband that I needed a china cabinet. It seems like my own rites of passage as I enter midlife, so that like my elders and ancestors, I can engage in the symbolic and the very real act of protecting, preserving what they establish. Not just for myself, but for my own children, my nieces, my nephews, my community, and for the future generations to come. So, through this presentation, rather, you'll hear me offer up a lot of quotes. I do a lot of reading in the process of painting. Oftentimes I try to pair what I'm reading with what I'm making to give me the language to talk about the work. So to start out, I'm gonna give you a quote from Nina Simone. She said, "As far as I'm concerned, an artist's duty is to reflect the times. I don't think you have a choice. How can you be an artist and not reflect the times? That to me is the very definition of an artist." And I personally, especially in such a crucial time as this, agree with her and believe that to be true for my own practice. So for this exhibition, I wanted to recognize the urgency of the moment. As we consider all that has been and continues to be stripped away, I wanted to address our innate human desire and right to survive and thrive. I wanted to explore ways and reasons we protect, preserve, and persevere when the world we know begins to look unrecognizable. How do we ensure the preservation of that which we hold valuable, much like the artifacts in those china cabinets? So, to begin, before I even get into all of that and start talking about the work, I want to offer up a couple of acknowledgements. I first want to acknowledge and express gratitude to the ancestors who inspired this work. I could not have done this specific body of work without the help of Andrea, Francis, Rena, McChrystal, Toni, Octavia, and so many more. These paintings are only a reflection of what they've taught me and continue to teach me. I also would like to express my gratitude to the folks here at MOCA who have been just so incredible in helping me to bring my vision to life. So thank you for that. And last but certainly not least, my gratitude to my family who, you know, in the height of show preparation, know that I've become essentially useless and unavailable. So I have to say a big thank you to them. So Black women have played an important roles in social movements throughout history, oftentimes with little recognition. They have fought against intersectioning oppressions of race, gender, and class, influencing both thought and strategy, everywhere from the kitchen table to the dining room, to the classroom, to city halls. So even though we don't always receive the support that is warranted, they've consistently fought for the expansion of democracy. So my question was, what are some practical things we can learn from them? So I imagine this familial domestic space where many of us can find an object or two that we recognize that takes us back to a place of comfort, safety, and belonging, and engage in that conversation. Technically speaking, in approaching this show, what I wanted to do was create multi-figure, large-scale paintings that allowed me to engage in these layered narratives with dynamic compositions and create a space that would allow the work to speak and inform, you know, better of what I'm trying to say collectively. So I thought for the talk, for the sake of time and to actually give a structure, I would focus on 4 pieces in particular as pillars. Then afterwards, maybe during the Q&A, if you have questions about other works, I can speak to that too. But what you'll find is with every single painting, there's pretty much a deep dive for me. There's some text, there's some historical reference, there's some life event that collided that helped me to conceive the idea for each of the paintings. So I'm gonna talk about Seed for the Flower, which is the painting with the 2 figures standing on the steps over there. When She is Lifted, which is the central painting, the centerpiece there. Parable of the Seer, and The Grace You See, which is behind Eric. So I'll start with Seed for the Flower, and I'm gonna take my braces off because they're kind of jingling over here. And I'm gonna give you a lot of quotes, like I said before. And so our mothers and grandmothers have, more often than not, anonymously, handed on the creative spark, the seed of the flower they themselves never hoped to see, or like a sealed letter they could not plainly read, guided by my heritage of a love of beauty and a respect for strength. In search of my mother's garden, I found my own. And that is a quote from Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Garden. I was reflecting on heritage and what is passed down and what is carried forward. And of course, there's like the obvious physical traits that's passed from one generation to the next, but there are also personalities, certain characteristics you can pick up on. But there are some things that are not quite as obvious. I always chuckle when people ask me where I get my creative ability from, as if my great-grandmother had the privilege of musing over a flower, or as if my ancestors had the ability to train under some master painter, or even if they could, you know, as if they could go out and buy oil paints. That was certainly a privilege that was set aside for me. To give context, I thought this was an interesting comparison. I was looking at John Singer Sargent, and the year that he painted Madam X was in 1884. In 1884, my great-grandfather was 25 years old. And emancipation had only been for 15 years. It had only been 15 years prior. So that just kind of sets the framework for what was happening in their lives. So although I don't have that, what I do have, and what in reading Alice Walker's work, In Search of Our Mother's Garden, what she helped me to realize, my great-grandmother made quilts. And still, she did that and she passed that on. And my grandmothers on both sides, they gardened and they got an understanding of colors and nature. My aunts made clothing. My mother does design. She used to sell home interior. And this is all a part of what I personally inherited. Those are those things that are not quite as visible. And those are the things that, along with other things that I pass on. So in this piece, Seed of the Flower, it's actually an intergenerational conversation that goes through 5 generations. There are the 2 ladies standing on the stairwell, one of which is my daughter and her friend. There's a reflection of me in the glass, in the mirror behind them, taking a picture. There's my aunt on the table as a beauty queen. There's my grandmother on the wall, and then there's her aunt, who's her namesake, on the wall. So it's all about what is passed on from generation to generation, what we value, who is recognized, and for what. So I thought that was an important piece to include in this show, because it's like it speaks to all the things that we're trying to preserve. Technically speaking, and since I referenced Sargent before, I've always loved Sargent's work. And I love the way he painted these affluent figures and like these silks and satins looking, all elevated. And I wanted to see the women in my life depicted in that way. So this was one of my attempts at doing that. So that's Seed of the Flower. Next, let's look at When She Is Lifted. I came across an old photograph of a woman standing in the middle of a group in some sort of meeting, like a town hall meeting or something. And it may have been a church, I don't know, but it immediately gave me a feeling of being in the midst of that group and being celebrated and being lifted up. So I wanted to paint something like that. I wanted to expand on that too and create a scene where we could all maybe imagine ourselves being engulfed and celebrating this woman. It also led to I was thinking about, it helped me to think, who would we be as a society if we begin to lift up women like that? Who would we be as a society if we could lift up Black women like that as leaders? Not because they are women, not because they're Black, but because they are best. So, interestingly enough, although I had that concept, this is actually my second attempt at painting this piece. My first attempt, I got stuck in the early stages trying to figure out the technical aspects of arrangement and placement and things of that nature, like what level I'm viewing the scene. So I went through the archive, and I'd recently come back, this was last fall. And that spring, I was in Connecticut at Norman Rockwell's museum, and I saw the 4 freedom paintings. And the freedom of speech painting, which is iconic, it's a gentleman standing who's speaking up at a town hall meeting. So I thought, so I'll lean on that as inspiration for this. So I started by painting a smaller version, which is not here in the show, that I titled Yes. So it's this hand, though. It's like, yes. And it's this woman standing, and all of these figures are around celebrating her. There are a few looking on that are kind of questioning, but by and large, she's being celebrated. So once I did that piece, I felt like I could approach this larger work here. The central figure that you see in this painting is my dear cousin, Andrea. I had asked her sometime prior if she would be willing to pose for me. So it ended up not being until February that she came by and she posed. But she wasn't just coming to pose, she was coming to say goodbye because she was preparing to travel. She had already for years been traveling South Central America. She had gone to Africa. So she was heading back to Ghana on this particular trip. Sometime later, I was nearing the end of this painting and I received word that she had passed away. So that's literally the last day I saw her in person. She was an incredible woman, a light. She was a brilliant mind, a cancer survivor, a cancer coach, a podcaster, and she was a Georgia native. She loved her community. After she passed away, it took me about a month to handle affairs and pull myself together. But eventually, I returned to this painting with a new sense of urgency. In part because she was in it, and I wanted to celebrate her in that way, but also because of that reminder of how fragile we are and how important it is that we preserve whatever parts of ourselves we can. So, although I had made some good progress on this piece, in addition to having the people in the scene celebrating her, I included some of the mourners, mourning what we in fact had lost. And it's true, when we discount, discredit, disregard, dismiss, or lose the best of our society, we all lose out. We miss the opportunity to be better. So I wanted this piece to both celebrate her, but also reflect that. And that's she is lifted, when she is lifted. Parable of the Seer, which is this piece behind me. So throughout this work, I spent a lot of time reading books by Octavia Butler, particularly her parable series, Parable of the Sower, Parable of the Talents. If you have not read them, I highly recommend it. But if you have, and I see a few head nods, then you know just how eerily close these futuristic novels from the 1990s come to our present day reality. Everything from Butler's depiction of climate change impact and fires to the growing wealth gap, societal breakdown, and political extremism is represented in these books. In her article, A Few Rules for Predicting the Future, which was in Essence magazine in 2000, Butler offered these points of consideration when thinking about how to predict what's to come. 1, learn from the past. 2, respect the law of consequences. 3, be aware of your perspective. And 4, count on surprises. So I considered her words in earnest in painting Parable of the Seer, which of course is named in honor of her work. She also said in that article, where we stand determines what we are able to see. So in this painting, like in our society now, there are a lot of distractions. But which of those distractions or which of those things happening are the things that we should actually be concerned about, that are actually shaping who we are? In the painting, everything that's happening, though, actually was happening in some form during the time I was painting it. So there were wildfires, as she talked about in the parable books. There was leisure space travel, which is just acknowledgement of that growing wealth gap. And that space travel, of course, is a contrast to the things that are happening on the ground. My daughter, I originally didn't have that dent in the car, but my daughter was hit by a car during this time. And we spent a few days waiting to hear from the insurance company because we needed to know if the woman had car insurance so we could get it fixed. So things of that nature, so I included the dents in there. the bird flu outbreak, the hike in egg prices, and fun fact, our neighbor actually did have a chicken that kept getting loose, and so we'd have to call and tell them to pick it up. And then there are ICE raids and the political implications of that, which is reflected by that car that's zooming by. Not only do we have all of that going on, there's also the regular, everyday, mundane that we still have to take care of, like taking out the trash. Oh, and there's a bear that's kind of metaphorical, that's looming in the shadows back here. Everyone is looking to the sky except for the one figure who is looking at the path of the car going by. She wonders, as I wonder, where this all will lead. So with this piece, like with many others, I don't offer answers. These are all just questions and reflections and considerations and things for us all to look at. So that's Parable of the Seer. Butler gave me a wonderful segue to the grace you see, because she said in that same article, the very act of trying to look ahead and discern possibilities and offer warnings is in itself an act of hope. And that leads me to the grace you see. And we're going to reflect on Toni Morrison for this piece. In Beloved, Morrison says, Baby Suggs, the elder, holy, offered up to them her great big heart. She did not tell them to clean up their lives or to go and sin no more. She did not tell them they were the blessed of the earth, its inheriting meek or its glory bound pure. She told them that the only grace they could have was the grace they could imagine, that if they could not see it, they could not have it. To me, Toni was encouraging us to tap into our sacred imagining. Otherwise, what is all of this preservation, protection all about? Why store up the fine china, the crystal, the linen, if we cannot imagine a great feast at the end? So the grace you see is my approach, my attempt at beginning that imagining. I wanted to imagine a place of leisure, peace, frolic, for intergenerational rest. Also, I'd considered that I had not seen a large-scale painting with Black women just lounging. So while this is a scene, this is actually a scene from a park near my house, like the layouts, the trees. It's also a reflection of Georges Laurent's Sunday Afternoon, in the Isle of Grandchamp. So this one was actually one of the last pieces that I painted, or was literally the last piece I painted. So it holds a lot of notable details that also trace back to my cousin. I was reflecting on memories, and I decided to depict us as the children that are frolicking, as if we could go back in time. The sailboat in the on the left-hand corner, I actually did see that boat on a boat ride with her, because she loved boat riding, and I took a picture of it. Because to me, that sailboat that was just docked in someone's backyard was like the symbol of leisure. It's like, I couldn't imagine, like, at that point, having a life where I could just have that sailboat. So I knew, this was years ago, I knew I'd want to paint it someday, so I was excited to have an opportunity to include that. Of course, I imagined myself in my own personal freedoms as I'm standing there with arms outstretched. And that act of lifting up that blanket and tossing it aside was my way of reflecting on decolonized and unrestrained imaginations and what that would look like. And believe it or not, that was actually pretty difficult for me. And so that's something that I have decided I'm going to spend this year working on. So I believe these 4 paintings represent the cornerstones of this series. and hopefully offer a deep dive into my intention, my process, and the revelations that I discovered along the way. After several months of painting, I wrote my statement in the form of a letter in the tradition of James Baldwin and Ta-Nehisi Coates. As Baldwin addressed his nephew in The Fire Next Time, and Coates addressed his student in The Message, I addressed you as kin through a letter to my beloved cousin. And if you don't mind, I'd like to read it in closing, even though I know some of you have already read it, because my hope is that after going through some of those main pieces, it kind of illuminates what I was trying to say. Dear cousin, as you know, this discussion of saving our sacred selves began as a question. What do we do to protect the most cherished parts of ourselves, not to mention our physical selves, in all that has been established? How do we preserve what is essential to who we are, our collective memory, our true history, our joy, our ability to imagine without constraint, to thrive in the pursuit of happiness? We talked about this. Do we pioneer unfamiliar places across borders and oceans? Do we gather in the rural communities of our elders and rebuild afresh? Do we take to the streets, or do we rest? My dear, you were brave. In an act of resistance, you chose to make your world bigger, to ask how this Black body is received elsewhere. But we're not just Black, are we? But that kind of choosing, though, that insists on our wholeness, guided much of what I explored in this work. Preserving what is most sacred, even when the world forgets to name it as such. So to answer the question of how we are to save our sacred selves, I read, I listened, I watched. Like Alice Walker, I searched my mother's garden and her mother's too, at least as far back as I could go, uncovering the power, creativity, and beauty of their inner lives. I followed the precepts and prophecies of Octavia Butler, studying her parables and her few rules of predicting the future, which remind us that predicting what's ahead can be practical, and shaping what's to come requires attention and courage. And I've leaned into the radical imagining of Toni Morrison urged, believing that the grace you see is the grace you will have. I talked to our elders, cherishing their stories and history. I also listened to you as you reminded us to have those meaningful connections, a spiritual practice, and to take care daily. The works in this exhibition hold space for all of these reflections and remembering. They reach backwards to try to understand what might come next. Through intergenerational conversations and figures that resist erasure, I offer no answers, but a call to remember, to feel, to connect, and to hold space for better. That is the least we can do today. After visiting my studio and seeing my altar, you know I believe in honoring our ancestors, not just those from long ago, but those whose departure still stings. Beloved, this is for you and the other 92% who continue to choose the people. With love and memory, Ayana. And that is our presentation.
The canvas, right? Like, I'm curious about why wasn't it like shaped? Why the structure of the canvas?
I knew early on I wanted to play with shape, and sometimes with a canvas, a rectangular canvas, it's like, it's a rectangle. My image has to fill the rectangle, but I don't necessarily want to fill it as a rectangle. I want it to let it be what it is. So with this diptych, I actually played around with the arrangement. With these two, I played around with the shape on the canvas. But for this one, it made more sense to me because I wanted to explore the height, looking up into the sky, and the width here of the car. It made more sense to me to just kind of arrange it this way, which is pretty untraditional, but I thought it was fun. So when I'm working on a show, what I typically do is I have a model. I'm old school. I have a miniature model made. And as I'm planning it out, I will kind of print out some images and arrange it within the space. But that's not very early on. That's a little bit later. First, I'm thinking about what the content of the show is. And I'm leaving room for the artwork to kind of direct me in terms of scale, in terms of like how it wants to be presented. I may have the concept of the story, but I have to play a little bit to get to this arrangement. So yeah, it was the artwork itself.
Ayana, I want to say congratulations on a very good show.
Thank you.
But in your artist talk, I didn't hear you mention any African American artists that influenced. I can see a lot of John Biggers, Carrie Jane Marshall. I can see a lot of those in the work. But then, what about those paintings over there? I'd like to know on the wall, the back walls. Yes, the hands.
So the idea of the hands came from this idea of the china cabinet and the figurines and these. Really, I started to go in the direction of leaning a lot into the Black figurines, like Thomas Blackshear, you know. But I was thinking more about the ones that I know at least my family had, which may not have necessarily had a name to, you know, associated with them. And I was thinking about them not as figurines, but as relics that were collected and kind of had their own charge. So to me, I wanted to take that and present it in a way for us to look at those same objects, but look at them differently. So presenting them in the form of an oil painting just made the most sense to me. And no, I didn't mention a lot of Black artists, but always Henry O. Tanner is with me in everything I do. So that's like, that even that whole almost religious kind of narrative undertone with the work. So yeah, hopefully I answered that question.
This is an amazing show. I would just like to know about, I guess, your process, your painting process. You know, like, you know, speak to me as a painter and just talk to me about, like, you know, how you're building your layers and like what you're like incorporating the paint with as far as like mediums and stuff like that. That's what I would be curious to know.
Okay. So building layers, those smaller pieces there, which is like my ancestral corner, that's the underpainting for everything that I do. I use Venetian red as my like, it's like a Georgia clay kind of, is it sepia kind of color that gives me this, my eldest daughter describes it like this antique-ish effect. So that's essentially that. In terms of the entire process, I spend some time gathering images, sketching. I do photo socials where I'll have a concept that I'm working on and I'll invite people, and we'll kind of take pictures centered around that. So that's how, in some instances, I get people. Sometimes I make people up. I always say art is king and I'm a subject, so like whatever I have to do to get the painting is what I do. Typically, I will body snatch sometimes at public events and just photograph people. So yeah, that's my process. And then I typically work on about 3 or 4 paintings at a time because I have a short attention span. And then when I get to the final layer, like after 2 layers, I can kind of focus on one at a time. And yeah, that's how I go. And if I get stuck, a lot of times that's when I have to stop and write. I'll write beforehand, but I write, especially if I get stuck. And I got stuck with a lot of these, honestly, if we're being honest. But I got stuck with this one. And so I have to sit back and like, okay, what is my intention here? And do a lot of writing, do a lot of researching, not just artists, a lot of literature. I listen to books when I work. Yeah, so did I go over all the things? Okay.
Hi. So I'm curious about how you manage the balance of the pieces holding heavy history while also the practice of care within them without letting that heaviness, that trauma dominate those paintings, those pieces.
That's a good question. Well, I guess for one thing, I don't think about it as the trauma part. I think about it as just, it is. It just is. It's truth, right? And so whether, like, I guess When She Is Lifted would probably be the best example of that. It's the truth of the thing. And the truth of the thing just has to stand even when I'm not here. So I focus on depicting the truth of the thing. Pairing it, I feel like my job is really, I don't create, I just gather and bring together like the Legos. I pull current events, I pull historical context, I pull my own life experiences, I pull, whatever other literary or artistic reference there is, and I just bring it all together. That's my only job, which is pretty easy comparatively, other than like trying to just conjure up stuff. And you work it until it feels like it clicks and it looks like something I'd seen before, even though I hadn't seen it before. It just has this like, hey, there you are, like this familiar kind of energy to it. You know what I mean, Tim? Like, am I making sense? So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I do.
So I have another question. I have a comment first, which is your work. I get what you're saying. The work makes me feel very hopeful and warm. That's the emotion that comes to mind. But I'm curious about this one. I noticed that all of the pieces really, the main character is like a black woman, and this one is centering like black men. And I'm just curious, what made you include it in this space?
Because does it though?
Oh.
So I took that picture at a funeral. Okay. And it was actually when my mother-in-law transitioned, and that's her painting right there on the stand here. And I took a number of photos there, but what struck me about it in that moment was how even in her absence, she was bringing together this love and this energy. And so it is of men, but it's also of a woman. And that's why I felt it should be here. Because it's also like the period at the end of the sentence, if you kind of going around the room in this direction. And it reminds us on the way out what matters: love, community, and coming together.
Speaking on this piece here, The Grace You See, you mentioned that when you were painting it, that you realized that your imagination had a barrier. And I was wondering, and you said you're going to work on that this year. That's your goal. What does that look like? Kind of breaking through that to reach that radical, like sacred imagining.
So I'm actively doing a lot of imagining. I teach 2 days a week at Brenau University, so that's like an hour and a half, 2 hour drive each way. So my task for myself while I'm driving is to imagine. I'm imagining things for myself, for my children, that I had not had the courage to imagine before. whether that's going to a place, whether that's doing a thing, I will even say in 2021, when I went full-time as an artist, it was only a few years prior that I had fixed my lips to say that I wanted to be an artist. And that took courage. And we don't realize how much courage it takes seriously though, we don't realize how much courage it takes to actually say what we really want. Like, we just walk around accepting a lot of what is packaged and given to us or told we should want. You should want to be this tall. You should want this much. There's no reason to want this much. This is enough for you, right? But I want to tap into that imagining that doesn't have a limit, that no one can tell me because of who I am, where I was born, what I look like, what I get or don't get to have, what level of achievement I can have, what I can and cannot do, where I can and cannot go. So my act right now is imagining. The next step is doing. But I do believe, and the universe has not shown me otherwise, that as I start imagining and envisioning, opportunities and things will open up to me that maybe before I had not given way for them to. So, any other questions? I did a good job then.